As we begin Yom Kippur, I want to acknowledge the most difficult of years that has just ended and all that we've experienced in it. For the past year, we have felt worry and lived through events that we never imagined we would see in our lives. In Israel, in escalated political tensions in our country, in life-threatening natural disasters, in a 200% increase in anti-Semitic acts throughout the United States, including on college campuses, in charges and accusations made against us simply because we are Jews. Our jaws have dropped regularly, and we have felt powerless again and again. All of this is real, and all of these emotions are real. I name them, and I affirm them. I have lived them myself, as an American Jew, as a rabbi, as a mother of 2 high school students and a college student, as a lover of Israel, as a Zionist. This sermon is not intended in any way to give short shrift to the events of the past year or the events that continue. But in the next few minutes, I'd like to invite us to do something different. I invite us to look closer to home and to look honestly. Each Yom Kippur, we sing an alphabetic acrostic of transgressions. You know it. Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Dofi. We'll sing it in this service, no worries. That litany is part of our Vidui, our communal confession of Yom Kippur. And yes, Jews do have confession. It's what's called the Vidui Zuta, or the small confession. The Alchet being the larger confession, or Vidui Rabbah. We stand as a community for confession on Yom Kippur to give one another strength. It's not easy to confess our sins, but when we stand with others, we gain strength from those around us. And sometimes, as we name transgressions on the list, we find that we remember things we did that we might have forgotten along the way. After looking within and witnessing this past year, the year that we, North Shore Congregation Israel, and certainly Jews across the globe have lived through, I've written a new litany, not to replace the old one, which so many of us have in our heads, but to reflect on this moment and to reflect on how we have acted and how we have treated one another. The goal of this litany is not to look outside at the world how others treat us, but to look within, to consider how we have acted, responded, and spoken. All of us who are here in this sanctuary physically or via live stream, who are here in this sacred sanctuary to mark Yom Kippur. The alphabetic litany of transgressions I would offer this year goes like this. And you might be able to read it behind me. We have avoided, angered, blindly viewed, and blamed. We have ceased talking to loved ones and despaired. We have escalated tension, feared our children and parents, and fought with family. We've generalized, given in to powerlessness, and hated, ignored nuance, and justified our reflexive actions on social media. We've kept grudges and lacked tolerance, marginalized, were narrow-minded, and did not listen to those closest to us. We gave in to overwhelm, pained dear ones, and pigeonholed others by protest or political party. We've been quiet instead of speaking out, and ruminated without taking action. We have scorned, shut out, and spoken with disregard for the truth, taunted and tuned out, and made others feel unseen and unheard. We've disregarded views of those we disagreed with and written off friends, family, and colleagues. We've X'd out folks who upset us, yelled at our parents and children and made them cry, and zealously stood by our convictions without paying heed to others. Not that any of us have committed all of these misdeeds, but when we say them together, we give one another strength to say what we have done. And we recognize some things we did along the way but had not considered. Why this list? Why look within? Why look within when it feels like so much of the world is against us, out of our control? Precisely because this is within our control. This is something we can do, consider our actions and our words, and change them if need be. To be clear, this litany is about how we have responded to world events in our innermost circles of family and friends, how we have engaged with neighbors and colleagues with whom we disagree. This list challenges us to look at how we have acted and consider how we want to act. Even in the toughest of times, even when we're surrounded and beaten down by that which we cannot control, we need not succumb to the lowest common denominator of behavior. And all of these transgressions have something else in common. They reflect how we see and understand one another, or not, those we're closest to, and even about people we might still yet get to know. In his book, How to Know a Person, which came out last October, social commentator David Brooks posits that we don't actually see each other. Brooks says we're blind to one another and that people across society have lost the ability to see and understand one another, thus producing a culture that can be brutalizing and isolating. This society of blindness, he explains, is one in which we don't see each other beyond the surface, and in which we don't communicate deeply or meaningfully. We size people up at first glance and generalize, or we get stuck in our own heads. Ever been there where the person you're talking to is talking and you're thinking, how do I look to them, or how do I respond, and not really listening to them? Brooks says we're too self-centered to get to know others deeply. And we live in a technology-obsessed, transactional world in which we view people by what they are for us, what they can do for us, what they can give us. Notably, this is Brooks' description of our society before last October. And it's gotten worse. We connect and see each other less and less. We hear each other less and less. And that's really antithetical to our Jewish being. Tomorrow in Torah, we'll read from Deuteronomy, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai Elohechem. You stand here together to enter into the covenant, all of you, kulchem. And then Torah spells out who's there: women, men, children, heads of tribes, wood choppers, water drawers, even the strangers in our Israelite ancestors' community. The rabbis jump into these opening words of Nitzavim and say, what is this about? They answer over the generations. They say everyone was there. Everyone is equal, no matter your gender, your age, or your social standing, or your occupation. And the rabbis say everyone has a responsibility to the covenant, and everyone is responsible for one another. So there's a reason we read these words, we hear them each year on Yom Kippur. Look around. We're all here, by and large, over live stream too. Whatever our gender, our occupation, our age, our education, our residence, our history, we're here together. On this holiest day of the Jewish year, we sit shoulder to shoulder in our exquisite sanctuary, each of us bringing so many facets of our individual identities and experiences. We bring our political beliefs, our faiths, our doubts. Each of us carries our views on Israel, our joys, our brokenness, our loneliness and connectedness. We're all here in this sanctuary for Yom Kippur, in this sacred sanctuary, for this sacred day and its goals. We're all here, seemingly all in it together. But are we really? I share with you 3 examples, 3 pieces of inspiration as you consider that question. Last spring, we welcomed a speaker from Germany. Some of you were here. The speaker is one who is a leader in placing Stolperstein, or memorial tripping stones, throughout Germany and other countries in Europe. These stones are remembrances, memorial stones for those who were victims of the Holocaust, and are placed in front of their homes. The speaker was excellent. The dinner was good too. But what was remarkable was what happened at the dinner. I stood back there where some of you are sitting in Frank Memorial Hall, and I walked around and listened. There were people there who knew each other, but by and large, there were people there who didn't know each other, many of whom have been in services and programs and classes and in this sanctuary for years together and never spoken. But that night, they connected. They asked one another stories of their family's origins, their stories of survival. The question started really simply. Where did your family come from? Connections were made through places and journeys, and folks talked, listened, and really heard. They stayed late into the evening. A second example. Some years ago, I gave a sermon about issues of social concern, and some members of our congregation disagreed with me. A few reached out graciously and said, "I disagree with you," and they accepted my invitation to come talk. We sat in my office. We shared our views as different as they were, calmly and peacefully. We didn't yell or scream or fight. We didn't try to change one another's minds, but we listened and thanked one another. We could have written one another off. We could have said, "Oh, that's their view or their allegiance," but we did not. A third example. Consider the interactions between a father and a son this past year. The father is an ardent Zionist. He's lived in Israel, studied in Israel, brought his family there on sabbatical. The son is a college student who has been actively protesting for ceasefire and divestment on his campus. Parent and child have different views, and they've held difficult conversations this year. And while they are, and I quote, "still divided on what it means to be on the right side of history in this conflict," their conversations have led to epiphanies from speaking together. The son acknowledges, "I agree with my dad in the sense that his generation was around during that era where the idea of hope was possible." And the father says, "I'm grateful to have my child who still loves the Jewish people to be an interpreter for me of people who are feeling so dismayed about Israel right now." The father explains that the two need to stay in relationship. And his son explains, "There's more than one way to be right, and I think we owe it to ourselves, to our communities, to stay in contact and stay in dialogue." To be willing, the Son adds, to engage in the broader Jewish community with viewpoints that we disagree with. This is a series of painful conversations between a parent and a child, the closest of relationships. Rather than walk away from one another and that cherished relationship, they're talking and listening to one another. They're trying to understand and learn from one another. Any or all of these instances of listening, of connecting in new and uncomfortable circumstances, any of them have transferable insights for us all. Not exactly in the same situations, though maybe those too. They might seem daunting or really uncomfortable to consider. But we can try and start incrementally. I give you 3 steps or 3 examples. First, we can build and sustain our social connectivity muscle. Ask ourselves, have I gotten to know someone recently just because? And someone I didn't have a need for, I didn't have a vested interest in getting something from them, but someone I just introduced myself to with the potential of connecting. 2, practice selfless curiosity. Ask ourselves, when was the last time I sat with someone and actively listened, not trying to top them and connect my story to theirs, but to just listen to their story and engage them with curiosity? And 3, get comfortable with discomfort. Ask ourselves, when was the last time I sat with someone with whom I totally disagree? On current events, on faith, on politics, on who knows what. But when was the last time I sat with someone I totally disagree with, not for trying to change their mind, but to hear them and understand them? To be together with our differing views and our discomfort. All of these are really difficult to do. For me too. And all of these strike a deep chord, or can strike a deep chord of vulnerability within us. Sure, it's easy to demonize someone in our family and say, oh, we disagree with them. Write them off, stop talking to them. It's easy to stay within our own bubbles and say, I don't need to talk to new people, I don't need to make new connections, and just have the small conversations of the day. But it's Yom Kippur. Let's challenge ourselves to do more and do better, even if it's uncomfortable. Yom Kippur is, after all, about discomfort. We can gain strength from one another, sitting together, standing together, asking ourselves these questions and honestly considering our answers. Unconvinced? Think of it this way. Think of the person you're imagining talking or not talking to at this moment. Assume that that person contains some piece of themselves that has no weight, no size, no color, or shape, but a thing that gives them infinite value and dignity, and something that you have too. It's a piece of themselves that we all have. In Torah, we say, B'Tselem Elohim. Each of us is created in God's image. Each of us has a piece of the divine, of God within us. And that makes us equal. That we read in the earliest chapters of Genesis. If we look at each other this way, we can shift how we see one another. We can then regard those closest to us with kindness, with curiosity, with receptivity, with openness. Even as the world crashes loudly around us, we could instead listen to one another gently, we could hear one another and build meaningful connections. As we say these words together in a moment, may we reflect on those relationships closest to us and gain strength and insight from one another this Yom Kippur. Let us see, hear, and connect with one another in this new year. Please join with me. The words have magically appeared behind me. We have avoided, angered, blindly viewed, and blamed, ceased talking to loved ones, and despaired. We have escalated tension, feared our children and parents, and fought with family. We've generalized, given in to powerlessness, and hated, ignored nuance, and justified our reflexive actions on social media. We've kept grudges and lacked tolerance, marginalized, were narrow-minded, and did not listen to those closest to us. We gave in to overwhelm, pained dear ones, and pigeonholed others by protest or political party. We've been quiet instead of speaking out, and ruminated without taking action. We have scorned, shut out, and spoken with disregard for truth, taunted and tuned out, and made others feel unseen and unheard. We've disregarded views of those we disagreed with and written off friends, family, and colleagues. We've X'd out folks who upset us, yelled at our parents and children and made them cry, and zealously stood by our convictions without paying heed to others.